You think of snowstorms, and your mind goes to heated homes, electric blankets, canned food in pantries. But what if there was no electricity, no insulation, no supermarket down the street? What did a blizzard mean when survival depended on a clay lamp and a wool blanket, when the nearest help was a day's walk away, when losing your firewood meant losing your life? Stay until the end, because understanding this changes how we read the Gospels. Winter in first-century Judea was not the gentle, picturesque season modern imagination paints. In the highlands surrounding Jerusalem, in the valleys of Galilee, in the scattered villages clinging to rocky hillsides, winter brought cold that penetrated stone walls and wind that howled through every crack in a mud brick home. Snowstorms were rare, but when they came with a violence that turned familiar paths into death traps and humble dwellings into fragile shelters against forces no human could control. The typical home was a single-room structure, walls made of fieldstones stacked and mortared with mud, sometimes reinforced with timber when families could afford it. The roof was flat, constructed from wooden beams layered with branches, reeds, and packed earth. When it rained, the roof became heavy. When it snowed, it became heavier still. Inside, the floor was hard-packed dirt, sometimes covered with woven mats. There were no windows in the way we understand them, only small openings high on the walls to let smoke escape and dim light enter. At night, these openings were covered with cloth or wood to keep the cold out. The fire pit sat in the center of the room, a shallow depression ringed with stones. Smoke rose slowly, clinging to the ceiling before finding its way out through the roof opening. The smell was constant, burning olive wood, dung cakes when wood ran low, the faint sourness of stored grain, the musk of animals sleeping in the corner. Yes, animals. In winter, the family goat, the donkey, sometimes a few sheep were brought inside. Their body heat was not a luxury, it was survival. You can hear the wind outside, a low moan that never stops. You can feel the cold creeping through the gaps in the door, a wooden frame covered with skins or rough cloth. The walls radiate cold. Even near the fire, your back is freezing. Your hands are warm only when you hold them directly over the flames. The children sleep huddled together under every available blanket, wool coarse and scratchy but precious. The wife keeps the fire going through the night, adding small pieces of wood, rationing what remains. The husband checks the door again, pressing mud into cracks where wind is getting through. This is not a story. This is Tuesday night in January, somewhere on the road between Bethlehem and Hebron. When a snowstorm began, there was no warning system, no weather forecast. You read the sky. You felt the air. The smell changed, sharper, colder, metallic. Clouds came low and fast from the west, grey and swollen. Shepherds in the fields knew to move their flocks immediately. Travelers knew to find shelter or turn back. Farmers knew to bring everything inside, tools, wood, water jars, anything that could be buried or lost. Because once the snow began, you did not leave your home. The oil lamp was the heartbeat of the house during a storm, a small clay vessel, palm-sized, with a shallow reservoir for olive oil and a spout where a twisted flax wick burned with a flame no larger than your thumbnail. That tiny flame was everything. It was light in a darkness so complete you could not see your hand in front of your face. It was warmth, however small. It was hope, a sign that life continued inside while the storm raged outside. But oil was finite. A household might have one, maybe two small jars of olive oil stored for winter. Each lamp burning through the night consumed oil that could have been used for cooking, for selling, for the next emergency. The wick had to be trimmed carefully. Too long, and it smoked, wasting oil. Too short, and it gave no light. Women knew by touch, by instinct, how to keep that flame alive with the smallest possible consumption. When the storm stretched from 1 day to 3 to 5, decisions became brutal. Do we keep the lamp burning all night, Or do we sit in darkness to save oil? Do we eat the last portion of lentils now, or wait another day? Water was another calculation. In good weather, women walked to the village well or the nearest spring every morning, carrying jars on their shoulders. They filled larger storage jars at home, ceramic vessels that held enough water for cooking, washing, drinking for several days. But when snow blocked the paths, when ice made the well unreachable, those storage jars were all you had. You rationed. A cup for cooking, a cup for drinking, nothing for washing. When children cried from thirst, mothers gave them snow melted over the fire, but this consumed firewood, and firewood was running low. The woodpile outside the door, stacked carefully in autumn, was buried now under drifts. Men tied cloth around their faces and forced the door open, digging with bare hands to reach the wood underneath. The cold bit into their fingers within moments. They grabbed what they could carry and stumbled back inside, slamming the door against the wind. Every trip outside was a risk. Men had been lost in snowstorms 10 steps from their own homes, disoriented, frozen, found days later when the snow melted. Inside, the family arranged itself around survival. The elderly and the very young stayed closest to the fire. Adults took turns sleeping, someone always awake to feed the flames, to listen for trouble. The roof creaking under the weight of snow, the animals becoming restless, the door straining against the wind. Meals were simple, stretched thin. Bread baked days ago, now hard, softened in water or broth. Dried figs, olives preserved in brine, lentils boiled into a thin soup. No one complained. Complaint changed nothing. The psychological weight was as heavy as the physical cold. You did not know when the storm would end. You did not know if your neighbor had enough food, enough oil, enough wood. You did not know if the roof would hold. You sat in semi-darkness, listening to the wind, waiting. Time moved differently. An hour felt like a day felt like a week. The only rhythm was the fire. Feed it, watch it, feed it again. This was the reality when Jesus spoke about lamps and oil, about preparedness and watchfulness. This was the world that understood, viscerally, what it meant to have your lamp go out in the darkness. The parable of the 10 virgins was not a metaphor to first-century ears. It was memory. It was fear. 10 women waiting for a bridegroom, 5 with enough oil for their lamps, 5 without. When the bridegroom delayed, when night stretched longer than expected, the lamps of the unprepared went dark. "Give us some of your oil," they begged. But the wise virgins refused, not out of cruelty, out of survival. "There won't be enough for both us and you." You understand this differently now. You understand that sharing oil when reserves are low does not double the light, it extinguishes both lamps. You understand that in the cold and the dark, when storms last longer than expected, preparedness is not selfishness, it is responsibility, it is the difference between life and death. The foolish virgins were not simply late. They endangered everyone by failing to anticipate what any villager knew. When winter comes, when storms come, you prepare as if help will not arrive, because often it does not. In villages scattered across the Judean hills, families survived storms alone or not at all. There was no emergency service, no government relief. If your roof collapsed under the snow, you cleared it yourself or died beneath it. If your fire went out and you had no way to restart it, you wrapped yourself in everything you owned and hoped your body heat would be enough until morning. Sometimes it was not. Children, the elderly, the sick, these were the ones who did not make it through the long winters. Their deaths were quiet, private, mourned within the family, but accepted as the way of things. But survival was also communal when possible. When the storm broke, when paths became passable again, men went door to door checking on neighbors. They brought firewood to widows, They shared bread with families who had run out. They dug out doorways buried in drifts. This was not charity in the modern sense. It was covenant. The unspoken understanding that today I help you because tomorrow I may need help. The community that survived was the community that remembered this. Jesus grew up in this world. He knew the cold that made your bones ache. He knew the sound of wind tearing at a roof. He knew what it meant to ration oil, to stretch food, to sit in near darkness waiting for dawn. When he spoke about being ready, about keeping your lamp burning, about not knowing the day or the hour, he was not speaking in abstractions. He was speaking survival language to people who knew exactly what happened when you were unprepared, when you assumed the storm would pass quickly, when you believed someone else would save you. The shepherd leaving 99 sheep to find one lost in the storm. This was not a comfortable illustration. This was a man risking death in freezing darkness because every sheep mattered, because losing one meant a family ate less, wore less, had less to sell. The Good Samaritan binding wounds and providing oil and wine, these were emergency supplies. The things you carried in case you were caught far from home when weather turned or bandits struck. The storm always ended eventually. The wind died. The snow stopped falling. Silence replaced the howling. A silence so complete it felt unnatural after days of constant noise. Families emerged cautiously, blinking against the brightness of sun on snow, assessing the damage. Roofs sagging or collapsed, paths completely erased, the landscape transformed into something unrecognizable, beautiful and deadly at once. The work began immediately. Roofs had to be cleared before they caved in. Paths had to be dug. Animals had to be led carefully to water, their hooves slipping on ice. The village well, if accessible, became the gathering point. Women traded news as they filled their jars. Who had lost a roof, who had run out of food, who had not been seen since the storm began. Men organized searches for missing livestock, for neighbors who had not emerged. This is when the community's true character revealed itself. Some shared freely from what they had stored, others hoarded, calculating that another storm might come before spring. Some checked on the vulnerable, the widow with young children, the old man living alone, the family whose roof had collapsed. Others looked after their own first, reasoning that survival began at home. There was no single right answer. Both impulses were human, both rooted in the same fundamental truth. Resources were limited, winter was long, and no one knew what tomorrow would bring. Jesus taught in this context. His words about loving your neighbor, about giving to those who ask, about storing up treasures in heaven rather than on earth, these were not generic moral teachings. They were radical challenges to the survival calculus that governed daily life. He was asking people to trust that provision would come, that sharing would not lead to their own destruction, that the kingdom of God operated on different mathematics than the kingdom of scarcity. And yet, he never called his followers foolish. He never dismissed the real dangers of winter, of storms, of being unprepared. He told them to be wise as serpents, to count the cost, to understand that following him might mean suffering, might mean loss, might mean walking into storms with no guarantee of shelter on the other side. He promised his presence, his peace, his kingdom, but not immunity from cold, from hunger, from the very real trials that every human being in that world faced. The blizzard in first-century Judea was not a backdrop. It was a teacher. It taught that life was fragile, that preparation mattered. That community was survival, that the line between safety and disaster was thinner than people wanted to believe. It taught humility before forces no human could control. It taught the value of light in darkness, of warmth in cold, of bread when hunger gnawed. When you read the Gospels now, you read them differently. You see the lamp, and you know what it cost to keep burning. You see the oil, and you understand the choice to share or withhold. You see the storm, and you feel the waiting, the not knowing, the cold pressing in from every side. You see Jesus, not floating above human experience, but standing fully within it, speaking to people who knew exactly what it meant to survive the night and wake to an uncertain morning. The Christian faith was born in this world, concrete, physical, lived in bodies that felt cold and hunger and fear. It was not a philosophy debated in comfort. It was hope whispered in the darkness, faith maintained when the oil ran low, love practiced when sharing meant risk. This is what makes it real. This is what makes it true.
Move! Faster! Almost got him! Back to the door! Just a little further!